No.
Okay, thank you. Good evening, members, and welcome to the Adult Health and Social Care Scrutiny Board on Thursday, the 8th of April 2021. We are live and streaming on YouTube, so members of the public, anyone who is watching us, you're most welcome to continue to do so. This is the last meeting of the municipal year, so I'd like to thank you all for all your contributions throughout the year. I'd like to thank those members who've substituted. Councillor Yvonne, you've done quite a number of these meetings, so thank you for helping out and substituting where needed. Equally, I'd like to pay my thanks to Fazana, who joined us halfway through the year. She's been an absolutely excellent. She's been absolutely excellent in the administration. And unfortunately, we have to say goodbye to Alex, who has been part of the scrutiny team this year. It's been a great asset to the team. As I said previously, I think the scrutiny team has worked extremely well under Mike's expertise with Alex and Lauren, of course, and he will be, hard to replace, of course. So just a few contributions before we start the official meeting, just to give your thanks. As chair of the board. So let's, without ado, let's continue with the actual minutes or with the agenda. So substitutes nominated for this meeting, I have Councillor Riveron for Councillor Naeem and Councillor Baines for Councillor Whittaker. So thank you for joining us. And we've had apologies from Councillor Naeem and we've had apologies from Councillor Whittaker as well, just for the record. So that's item number one. Item number two, as always, members to declare their interest at the relevant time. Item number three, as explained earlier, members of the public are most welcome to join us on YouTube and listen to what we have to say. You will notice that unfortunately we do not have item number four, and this is not down to Fazana. We've had an apology from Ian Hughes. Unfortunately, minutes of the meeting, our last meeting, have not been published or completed yet. So clearly a little bit disappointed about that because it won't be in the council book next week equally, and they'll come into the next municipal year. So it's slightly disappointing because it was an extremely useful scrutiny meeting last time. So I can just briefly, if I can just add a few things in relation to what's happened since the meeting last time, because we, in terms of the street death report. So since then, I agreed to have a meeting with the Adult Safeguarding Board, and we had a very successful meeting with Marianne and Julia, and we were able to come to some good working relationships moving forward, and some good practices working forward as well. So we have regular meetings with them, and so we're updated, accordingly with some extremely important things before we hear it, 12 months down the line. So a bit of an update on that, and any questions, I'm happy to answer on that. Yes, Councillor Lee.
Thanks, Chairman. Just one, I understand that an apology has been sent, but these minutes are very important. And I'm just wondering, do we have a reason why they've not been prepared? Please.
Mike, can I bring you in at this stage? I think one resolution, I think I will be writing to Ian Hughes tomorrow in relation to this particular item anyway, in expressing our extreme disappointment that these haven't been produced. And I say it wasn't down to Vazana, because I say she wasn't at the last meeting, somebody else attended and was due to take the minutes. So yes, it is something that is it is of concern, it is important, and the subject matter was extremely important, and it should be in the public domain. So I quite agree, Councillor Lee. Mike, do you want to add on anything to that?
The committee administration team are one member of staff short at the moment, Councillor Blackburn, and I think the pressure of that has led to some delays in the production of these minutes. Yeah.
So if members are in agreement, I will do an email to Ian Hughes to express our disappointment. Understanding, whilst we appreciate that they are a member down, we appreciate the pressures that they're under because of this. However, as a board, it is important that these minutes are open to the public as soon as possible, and not, our next meeting in June, July time is really not quite right in my view. Any other comments from members before I move on?
Can I, Howard, please?
Yes, of course you can, Councillor Swift. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Oh yeah. Sorry, Chair. Could we see whether we could get Ian to manage to put these minutes out before full council, even if it has to go as a separate sheet? Because it was a significant meeting, and I don't think it should go over into the next municipal year.
I totally agree, Councillor Swift. This is something that I intended to include within the email that I've sent. I must admit, I was most confused, thinking, where's item number 4? Because it jumped to item number 5, and then realised we've got minutes, of course. So I quite agree. I think there's no reason why they shouldn't be produced before the full council meeting, and if necessary, perhaps an additional 5-minute meeting just to authorise us as a board, as a proper board, might be a good idea. If everyone's in agreement to that, it would, literally, we'll try to keep it as swift as possible. 5 minutes. These are the minutes. Does anyone have anything? Are they a true record? So I'll be raising this with Ian Hughes tomorrow, in either via an email or telephone call, and see if we can get some resolution as quickly as possible, really. So thank you, members, for that. So we go on to what is listed as item number 4. So it's the post-COVID-19 adult social care market. So Jill, you've kindly put together a presentation. Members have seen the presentation in advance, but I know you would like to say a few words going through the slides. What I don't really want is regurgitation of the slides. So I'm sure you're going to add more to that, Jill.
Yes, certainly. So I've prepared a fairly comprehensive report, but because it's quite lengthy, I've put together a few brief slides that members haven't seen yet. So I'll just take people through the headlines, if that's helpful, and I'll share the screen now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. Technology is wonderful until it doesn't start working.
It's wonderful when it works.
It will. It will.
Fine.
You'll get there. Thanks for attending, by the way, Jill. Thank you.
Has that come up yet?
Not yet. No, we're just still, something's not quite. We've got a gremlin in the system, I think. Oh, there we go. It's coming up now. We've got the presentation now in front of us. So please present.
I've got 2. I've got 1 now.
Yeah.
Right. So if I just very briefly take members through the commissioning responsibilities for the Care Act 2014. So we've obviously got a duty to promote diversity and quality of service, and to understand the market shaping and definition for the purposes of commissioning, procurement and contracting. We've got a responsibility to manage provider failure, and also to manage other service interruptions. So for the purpose of this evening, obviously members need to scrutinise where we're at against those key requirements. So in terms of the highlights from the report, we've got a very diverse social care market in Calderdale, with a range of national, local and third sector providers. We've got some really strong partnership arrangements with NHS colleagues and CCG colleagues and Foundation Trust, and we feel that that's helped to minimise disruption to adult social care and support during the pandemic. The pandemic has obviously had significant impacts in terms of loss of life and fatalities for families, but Calderdale's death rates in care homes are significantly lower than other areas in the Yorkshire and Humber. And it's important to note that we started to see a shift occurring from a residential nursing care provision to community provision for adults requiring support before the pandemic. So post the pandemic, we have seen a bed base reduced by 89 beds, but as I say, we had a number of vacancy levels prior to the pandemic, so the actual impact is 1.2% reduction. We've seen a growth in the home care provider market, and that's from increasing numbers of care packages supporting hospital discharges and people to remain at home. COVID-19 has presented us with a number of opportunities to refocus our commissioning for a better future that promotes wellbeing, independence, choice and control. And Calderdale CQC registered care providers that are currently rated as requires improvement or inadequate at the end of April 21 was 6%, and that compares to 16% nationally. Provider workforce during the pandemic has remained relatively stable. We are, however, starting to see some movement in registered managers in terms of retirement or moving on, and it's too early to assess whether that's a potential impact of the emotional strain and fatigue of the pandemic. We do offer a future focused framework leadership programme which is designed to support registered managers of care homes, and we will be reintroducing that this year. We've also started to develop a pathway for casual care workers to provide relief support to care homes. And lastly, if I just touch on the requirement from market position statement. So it is a requirement for us to have a market position statement. I included a link to Calderdale's with the report. That obviously highlights need and demand for Calderdale and what support and care services people need and how they want them to be provided. The Calderdale market position statement was launched in December 2019, so it is relatively recent. It states our intentions up to 2024, and we hope to review it in 2022. And that's obviously our mechanism as to how we can retain a vibrant and responsive market that promotes personalised care and support. So I'm going to pause there and stop sharing and allow people to ask questions, assuming people have had the opportunity to read the report.
You're absolutely perfect. Exactly what I wanted, and because the actual report is very comprehensive as well. The slides did actually help. So if we can go as we normally do, if you click on participants and raise your hand if you want to raise a question, then I'll capture you in the best possible order. It might not be in the right order you think it has. So Councillor Hutchinson, I've got you first. I've got you, Councillor Evans afterwards, and Councillor Clark so far.
Thank you, Chair. In the report, you emphasise what's been going on with daily situation reports and the bringing together the intelligence of what's been happening within the various sectors, so that you can provide support for staffing or personal protective equipment or other requirements. I know in the draft white paper that has come out, there is an emphasis on a greater level of intelligence about what is going on within the care home sector or within the care sector in general. I believe that funding is reducing to support the pandemic response in this sector, or maybe I'm wrong, but that was my understanding. I was wondering whether the daily situation reports and the link officers had been found to be valuable enough to continue that regardless of the specific pandemic funding, or whether that was something that was going to go, was nice at the time, but is no longer continuing.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchinson. Essentially, the link officer roles were members of the commissioning service that were redeployed to provide that daily contact with homes, and we've been able to stop and start those roles and redeploy them as and when we've entered different phases of the pandemic. So it is still within our gift to be able to manage and redeploy resources in that way. In relation to the actual additional funding, particularly around infection control, the government have just announced an extension of that until June 21, and that's now been combined with the rapid testing funding as well. So we're just waiting for the next allocations for us to be able to distribute funding out to all providers, whether that's community, supported living or care homes, to support them with infection control. But as I say, in terms of the contact monitoring officer role and link roles, we continue to assess that as and when the pandemic enters different phases. We're also looking at how we can utilise the funding, particularly the 30% discretionary element, to manage any capacity demands we may have in supporting providers.
But you wouldn't see a role for that post-pandemic in the long term?
We have a quality team within the commissioning service, and those so we have a number of different roles. We have business relationship managers, and each of those are attached to specific named providers, and they are ongoing long-term roles. We also have quality monitoring officers that are also attached to certain providers, care homes in particular. So on a routine basis, we have sufficient kind of contact there. I don't know if Ian's wanting to come in.
Yeah. Thanks, Jill. I think, Councillor Hutchinson, I think one of the things that's in the white paper is that concept of place-based collaboration. And I think one of the things that we've learned through the pandemic is that whilst the Adult Social Care Directorate has led on the development of the SITREP, the one that's tracked us and given us the intelligence, lots of people have contributed to that, including the CCG and public health colleagues. I think one of the conversations that we need to reflect on and learn from is that we've probably had much more intelligence rather than just data on the whole sector on a number of areas that are quite crucial moving forwards. So I think what we'll probably start to do is start to have some conversations with our partners about how we will continue that function, but through a more formal partnership arrangement, because obviously it's quite resource intensive, but actually it has helped. And if we looked at the knock-on effects of the viruses, we've seen really good uptake of flu vaccination, so really low instances of settings. Some of those winter illnesses that we normally experience, like norovirus, again have been really low. I think we've only had one norovirus outbreak throughout the whole of the winter. So clearly having that level of intelligence and oversight is beneficial. So I think there's something as a system we'll need to talk about how we continue to resource that going forward. But I think it's certainly something that we want to be able to carry on and move forward with.
Thank you.
Excellent. Councillor Clark next, please.
Thank you, Chair. Of the 5 localities, you've set up a main provider for each locality. Is it the same provider for every locality, or is there a mixture of different main providers?
Jill, are you going to come out back on that? So yeah.
I'm just trying to think in terms of the main provider.
So, Jill, I think what Councillor Clark's referring to is the home care procurement process, and that we've got a lead provider, but
Yeah.
also that we have the subsidiary providers through the approved provider list as well. So I think that's the area of question.
So do we have an answer?
Yes, sorry, Councillor Clark, can I ask you to just repeat the question again?
I'm just wondering if it's the same provider for each locality,
The approved provider.
or do we have different main providers for each locality?
We have. I'm not clear.
Okay, so
I'm talking about the.
Yeah.
I'm getting this from the previous report, not your.
Yeah. So the
presentation.
Each locality has a lead home care provider, and it's a different lead provider in each locality.
Okay.
Picking up that home care lead provider, there's an approved provider list of a number of agencies who will work alongside them in order, if there were issues around capacity or choice, where an individual would prefer a provider from a different organisation. So there isn't a provider that's got more than one locality as lead provider. Does that answer your question?
Yes, I think so. It sounds very complex.
Chair, can I just follow up on that? And I do apologise for butting in, but where you've got a lead provider which is in locality 1, might they also be support providers in other localities as well?
They can be on the approved provider list, yes, okay, in other localities.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Chair, for allowing me that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolute pleasure. It's quite a complex one.
One of the rationales for spreading the lead provider across a number of providers is to add resilience. So, for example, if a provider was to, for some reason, to either hand back the contracts or leave or choose not to operate in the authority, if they had more than one lead area, that would create one disruption for individuals and their care packages, but it actually would pose more of a risk in being able to deliver effective home care. So that's why we have a small number, but what we don't try to do is duplicate a lead provider in more than one area.
So just one more question on that. So does the lead provider decide who their supporting providers are, or is it still the CCG or Calderdale Council?
So it's the Calderdale Council, as in our social workers will identify the support plan with an individual. That will go through our brokerage team, and they will pick up areas of work. If the individual does not particularly want to have a service from that provider, then we'd look at the other approved providers on that list.
Thank you.
So, yeah, no, thank you, Councillor Clark. Perhaps it's something that the panel in the new municipal year might take up in relation to looking at home care in more of a greater depth as an item agenda, but that's not for me to comment at the moment. So let me continue with the list. I've got quite a few people, so my apologies if it's not in the right order, but Councillor Lee, I got you next, and then Councillor Evans after that.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions I'd like to ask Jill. And I must say, Jill, it was a very good report that you covered. And the first question is you nominated some highlights that we all agreed were indeed highlights. So were there any non-highlights that are worthy of mention? Is there anything that happened that doesn't appear in the report which we need to work on? If you like, the opposite of highlights. And the other question that I have is, I notice on the various direct support payments to providers that have been given in the last 12 months, just adding up on that list, it comes to over £5.5 million. Now, that sounds like a lot of money to me. It'd be nice to have that amount of money. It's a lot of money. My question about that is, this is government money that's being provided to keep things going. Do you think in general terms, that money, £5.56 million, was sufficient funding from the government to do all that you needed to do in relation to direct support for providers? Thank you.
It's a trap.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Two very comprehensive and complex questions there for me to try and answer. So firstly, in terms of, if I take the question about any areas not mentioned in the report that might not, that if you like, might be considered to be low lights, and I'll also rely on colleagues Sean Cook and Ian Baines to step in here as well. But I would say at the beginning of the pandemic, we were all having to respond very, very quickly and having to learn very quickly in dealing with an unprecedented situation, ourselves, Public Health and CCG and other colleagues. And I think there would always be some learning perhaps in terms of the testing of people being discharged from hospital into care homes and such, where there is perhaps some learning to take from that. So I think that would be some of the main learning I would say there. The second point I would make, and this partially links to the question about funding. So you're right, it is a significant amount of government funding that we've had to administer. The restrictions on the funding have been, there's been a number of criticisms, I would say, from providers and others about the restrictions of the funding. The criteria has been extremely stringent in terms of how that
which is frozen, Jill, at the moment. We'll see if we can get hopefully back on. Ian, do you want to come in the meantime?
Yeah, sorry. Obviously, Jill's frozen. So I think one of the points Jill was going to make there was that the additional funding that's been made available to social care directly to the local authority or via the NHS through the CCG has helped us with our response to the pandemic. I think you, Scrutiny Board, will have heard me say on a number of occasions before that we are grateful for those short-term additional funds, because they've certainly helped with the pandemic. And I think when we look and reflect back on our experience of the pandemic, we will see that we have managed to, we did move very quickly to prevent outbreaks, which has prevented a number of people becoming positive and potentially resulting in death. So that's been a significant investment that's been really helpful. But Scrutiny will also know that on a number of occasions I've talked about the need for a long-term solution for funding. And whilst this interim funding has been really valuable and has definitely made a big difference, adult social care, and this has been an issue that's been passed from government to government, so it's not about political persuasion, have failed to resolve the issue of the long-standing funding, long-term funding arrangement. And unless that's really dealt with in the coming months, I do fear that some of the report that we've presented today, we might potentially see more provider failure, because what we don't have is a financially resilient and robust adult social care market.
Thanks, Ian, for coming in. We've still lost Jill, so I don't know if Fazani needs, if someone needs to see if we can. Oh, you've done fantastic. What a superstar she is. You're right. Okay, so the next person I have to ask a question is Councillor Evans. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And if Jill can hear, thanking her for her comprehensive report. I've got a couple of questions. One slightly overlaps on the answers that was made just now, but there is a reference in there in the report to a small but significant number of experienced registered managers deciding to retire or resign and move on. Clearly, that's a critical aspect, and it's understandable given the pressures they have been under during this time. I just wondered whilst we recognise that, what we are able to do to rectify that situation, to support that situation in terms of losing those people with experience and strengths. The second question related a little bit to what I was talking about just recently, in terms of one of the references is to managing provider failure. And my question was going to be, have we had any failures? Do we have concerns, which I think were being raised just before I started my question? And what action can we take and should we take to help and support in that situation? Because there's a obviously critical element of the service we provide. Thank you, Chair.
Ian, do you want to come back on and see if you can answer come back on any of that? Sorry to put you on the spot.
It's okay, not a problem. I don't think Jill's got back on the call.
No, she's not.
If I just deal with the registered manager's question from Councillor Evans first. So we have had a kind of long-standing approach to try and grow and support registered managers. And I think Jill referenced in her presentation something called the Future Focus Framework, which is a 12-week development a 12-month development program, which really kind of gets people who are thinking about becoming a registered manager and thinking about the kind of skill sets, the knowledge and behaviours that they need to do. So we have taken the decision to invest in growing and supporting registered managers across the sector. One of the things that I do as part of my wider kind of directorate role is I sit on something called ADAS, and I'm the workforce lead for ADAS for Yorkshire and Humber, and sit on the National Workforce Programme. So we've agreed that we will, as a region, through the work I'm doing at Yorkshire and Humber level, we are doing some work about how we will build and support a continuing professional development programme for registered managers and providing them with ongoing development, but also kind of emotional support. I think what we know through the pandemic is that they often have been at the very forefront of the demands from the local authority, from relatives, from health service. And I think one of the things that we want to do is recognise that we need to support them not just during the pandemic, but post-pandemic, because I think we are starting to see the effect of the emotional impact. We do know that that by having direct conversations with registered managers, that they have felt very supported by Calderdale as a partnership, and we continue to commit to making those things happen. But I think unless we and I think I'll just go back on a point that links slightly to Councillor Hutchinson's and Councillor Lee's questions about lowlights, really, which is, I think, at the very beginning of the pandemic, there was very little intelligence about COVID in care settings. And so we developed our own local intelligence, which is the SITREP that was referenced in Councillor Hutchinson's questions. I think as the pandemic increased, national decisions were made to also create something called the National Capacity Tracker, which was something that was already in situ, but its primary focus was looking at bed vacancies. And I think what was agreed nationally is they would expand the role of the National Tracker to get more and more information. I think probably what happened for several months is that the providers were being asked to not only provide information on the SITREP at a local level, but were being really pressured into completing a national capacity tracker, and were probably feeling that being pulled and stretched. And I think that's something that we need to learn from and make sure that we don't put additional burdens that aren't necessary on people.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, and thanks. Welcome back, Joe. I know you've had connection problems, so yeah, I think Ian stepped in and answered some of the questions that have been raised, and I'm sure he'll raise if there's any missing gaps on that one. Right, I have Councillor Barnes. Thank you for your patience.
That's okay. Thank you, Chair. I think it seems to be a night of asking two questions, so I'm not going to change that trend. And I'm going to continue and ask two, actually, I suppose 2.1 questions in reality is what I'm going to ask you. So I think, first of all, I think, yes, really comprehensive, detailed report. And I think we're all conscious of how long these reports take to produce. So thank you very much for that. We've touched on the elephant in the room, both in terms of questions and answers, and that's regard to funding. And I think there's an issue today. I don't know whether any of you have seen the report today. I don't know whether fellow councillors have seen it, where some charities have commented about care taxes being imposed by local councils on adults with disability and mental illnesses. So we're all conscious of the funding issue. I think what I'd like to throw it back, and I think Ian said a right to leave the contract from some care providers, and I think I'd like to know, is there a penalty for doing so? But what the first question really is, what financial checks do we do on care homes and care providers, and how regular do we check them? And I'll give you a prime example. So there's one care home in the community which showed in its last financials an apparent loss of £70,000. Okay, now it only produces abbreviated balance sheet, so there's no P&L, so we don't know what that is. The parent company, the ultimate parent company, which is about 3 or 4 steps up the line, seem to record in their abbreviated micro accounts a massive increase in their share capital, implying that they made a huge profit. So I just want to know what checks and balances we have to ensure that the care providers, the care homes, are actually financially strong enough to continue with the contracts, and what measures we take during the contract to check them. So that's question one. And the second one is in relation to, I suppose, social value commissioning. And I just wondered what aspects of social value commission have taken place in relation to, ensuring that the national living wage is being paid, that staff get paid travel time, that local labour is employed, equal opportunities for minorities, communities in management posts, what opportunities for apprentices have been looked at in previous commissioning, and whether these are how much of a factor they're going to be in future commissioning, and are we hard coding these into any tenders or requests for companies to tender for work? Okay, thank you.
Right, gosh, go for it, Jill, if you're the one to lead on
Sorry,
that.
Sorry, Jill. You came back in at the wrong time.
She's got a connection problem.
Again, it's a very complex subject, so Ian will obviously intervene as well. Just in relation to your question around social value and opportunities, we've actually recently, just as part of our fee uplifts, for the first time, we've included a variation to our contracts, a requirement for care homes to and for providers to pay staff at the low pay commission rate, so above the national living wage at £9.21 an hour. So we've given clear expectations to providers that we are expecting them to increase staff rates of pay. We've also been working with providers through the Workforce Capacity Fund to look at how we can incentivise staff through things such as paying for their transportation. We know some providers, for example, have initiatives such as they have pool cars, which are loaned to staff for staff to transport into work. So there are a number of initiatives that we encourage and providers take to support the workforce in terms of travel to work and such. And as I've said, with the low pay commission rate, we also, with the scheme I touched on earlier about the relief, the pathway to employment and relief scheme, we're promoting a pathway whereby new staff can work towards a care certificate to support them into work. So we have a number of measures that we take to support providers in raising the quality of practice, but also to make those conditions better for staff.
Chair, can I just come back on that? So what you say, am I right? 'Cause just want to pick on words, and I might be being semantic here, but you're saying expectations. So do we have care providers who currently pay less than the national living wage? Because what you said is an expectation, and you know, that's an expectation is completely different from actually doing it. And secondly, are all our care providers paying staff travel time? It's great to provide them with a flow car to travel there, but if it takes them an hour and a half to get there and they're not being paid for it, then that's no real benefit to them.
I think, Joe, just before you come back in, I think Ian's going to perhaps pick up on that as well. Is that right, Ian?
Yeah. So I'll try not to be semantic, but I think what Jill referred to was that for the first time we've asked people to pay above the national living wage, which is in line with the low paid commission. So we do not expect any provider, we would not tolerate a provider paying less than the national minimum living wage. And this time round, from this financial year, we're asking people to pay the low pay commission rate, which is above national minimum wage. So just to be clear, we would not tolerate that. As part of the approach for our commissioning, for the last 2 commissions of home care, we have stipulated that travel time should be paid, and so between visits that will be paid. If you have examples of where that's not happening, that would be really helpful to have that, because we can feed that into our contract monitoring visits. If it's okay, I want to just answer a couple more questions.
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's what I was hoping you might be able to do, yeah.
So I think, in short, to Councillor Barnes's question about social value, all our contracts, tendering processes use social value as a principle, and that we do also try and build into that users by experience in order that they can shape the tender so that they know what they're going to get out their home care provider. I think one of the examples Councillor Barnes used, and I am aware that some of these things do happen, and I think in Jill's presentation she talked about having a diverse range of providers, and certainly we have some very local companies that are family run and that are not part of a bigger organisation, but we also do have some providers that have parent companies. So we do financial checks on all our providers, and through our contract and quality monitoring we will continue to have quite robust conversations about the financial viability of each company. So there are quite rigorous checks we do at the point of awarding a contract, but once it's awarded we will have regular conversations with them about their financial position, but also about the quality of their provision, experience or any complaints or feedback we've had about the quality of the care provision. So we take seriously the importance of, you know, technically if you're a good employer, you will retain your workforce. And Scrutiny won't be surprised to say that my ambition will always be to strive to get social care workers on the real living wage, because what we do have is people moving jobs sometimes for pence. Most of our social care workers do highly skilled jobs that we just happen to remunerate at a really low rate. But actually, if you pay a good wage, you're likely to improve your retention and therefore not having to be in a continuous cycle of recruitment. So I hope that answers some of your questions, Councillor Barnes.
Okay, Councillor Barnes, is that? Yeah, cool, fantastic. Right, Councillor Metcalfe, you've indicated you would like to speak, so what's yours?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make really 1 or 2 comments and just add some information, if I may. First of all, I agree with the other board members. It's a very comprehensive report you have in front of you, and it is quite complex, is this whole issue. It's timely that at the same time that this has come to the board tonight, that the National Audit Office have just, the end of March, just released what was called the Adult Social Care Market in England report. And I'm I'm looking at some key facts and quite a lot of key points from the paper. I'm not going to go through those. I have put quite a few of these in my report to council next week. And there is a website where this report can be looked at, but it does make some interesting reading, and it's in tandem with the report you have in front of you tonight. I mean, I'll just mention one key point because it struck me as a real concern, and because funding's been mentioned earlier on in this discussion, and it does say as a key point that short-term funding settlements have hampered long-term planning, innovation and investment in care. And this goes back to what was said earlier, the absolute desperate need for a proper funded adult social care sector in the country. I know that keeps coming back, and it will keep coming back as long as we're not seeing any real action on this moving forward. I just wanted to just briefly comment on page 12 on the report, and with a concern. I don't think this has been mentioned, but I'm just picking it up. The concern that the report mentions that the contracts and commissioning team have begun to see a small but significant number of experienced registered managers deciding to retire or resign and move on to new areas of work. And I know this must be not just a concern locally, but a concern nationally after all their hard work, dedication throughout the pandemic, that some managers might wanting to be moving into other areas. It does mention what we were running before the pandemic, the Future Focus Framework Leadership Programme to support registered managers. And this is mentioned in the report, where they go through a number of cohorts to complete a programme which helps to achieve improved CQC ratings, and of course helps them to become managers in their own right. I went along to a couple of the award presentations. At the end, it mentions 2 cohorts in the last few years that we've been done on this. And I went to both of the award presentations at the end of each of those cohorts, and I was extremely impressed both in the quality of what was completed in the programme and the dedication and the real advantage I thought that these people that went through this programme was helped, and their enthusiasm. And so I know some of them since then have become registered managers themselves. So it's good to see that this will be hopefully continuing as soon as possible through our business relationship managers. So I think that really is important.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Mack. I look forward to reading your report for the council meeting next week. I think it's useful in conjunction with this very comprehensive report equally.
It is only a brief, what I've put in is just some brief headlines from that report I've just mentioned.
Yeah, no, perfect. Thank you so much for that. Councillor Hutchinson at this stage.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. There have been criticisms of the inspection regime, that if they turn up and everything is well, then they've wasted their time. If they turn up and everything is terrible, then they're too late. I noticed that the CQC has, by necessity, suspended its activities by and large during the pandemic. From your point of view, has that been a benefit, a detriment, caused you sleepless nights, or has it been neutral? Because given the greater level of information that's coming back from the care home sector to the social care department, given the greater stress on input from community nursing and quest for care in care homes, how much added value do you feel that the CQC inspection regime actually offers?
Thank you, Councillor Hutchinson. Ian, would you like to say that? So I think we'll put that responsibility onto you rather than Jill.
Thank you. I think certainly the role of CQC is really important, and I think it's important that we maintain a really strong collaborative approach with them. I've had this conversation with CQC locally about regulation in itself doesn't always deliver quality improvements, and actually it's about how we use the intelligence and regulation and work with the social care sector. That's the bit that will improve quality. I think what we have learned through the pandemic is that there are different ways in which we can have our eyes on what's happening in the care setting, and certainly we've had a range of intelligence. I think potentially what we might see as we come through the pandemic is that as we start to see more people in our care homes, we may see that some of the quality issues may have deteriorated over the last 12 months. And I think to some extent, I think because people have been very focused on preserving life, I am expecting that there might be some quality issues that will unfold in the coming months. But I think what we have to do is then work collaboratively with the sector to kind of make those improvements. I think CQC have a very valuable role to play, but I think it's how we work together that will make the difference. And regulation for regulation's sake won't necessarily be the answer, but if we can move to a quality improvement agenda, and certainly that's something that we've been talking with CQC locally about, that's been helpful. CQC have continued to do inspections through the pandemic. So for example, they have probably shifted their focus more onto infection control inspections to make sure that that providers are delivering effective infection control, because clearly that was a big issue through the pandemic. So it's not that CQC have stopped inspecting, they've probably shifted their focus, but I do anticipate that they will be stepping back up in the normal process, and what we'd be looking forward to is working in conjunction with them to really focus on improving the quality of the provision, because actually quality provision means there's a quality of life experience for those people who use those services.
Excellent, thank you, Ian. I think that's been a really useful discussion and a topic that won't go away. I'm sure we'll come back onto the agenda as well. So Joel, thank you for once again for coming to Scrutiny, presenting a very comprehensive report. And I'm sorry for some technical issues, but we got the gist and we've got the questions. I'm sure any members, if they've got any any questions, will email you as well. But yeah, thank you for putting the report together. Mike, just to come in just lastly.
Chair, just before we finish the item, Martin Percy from the CCG is here for this item, and I just wondered whether you wanted to ask whether Martin had anything to add from an NHS point of view.
Absolutely, Martin. Welcome to the meeting, please.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's been very interesting. It's always good to get an insight as to some of the concerns that are raised. I think from a reflection from a CCG, I think we are working closer together in this area than I think we've ever done before, and certainly aligning our approach to funding increases and uplifts and things like that. So I think we're both sharing that intelligence and also some of the resources, and certainly on the operational side. I know Sean and Sarah Anthony's have worked hard to make sure that works. So I think we're in a positive place moving forward from doing things together, and I think we'll see that continue going forward.
Good. Well, that's certainly what we'd like to continue. Effective communication is the key, really, isn't it? And joining together. So on that note, I'm going to close this agenda item. So Jill, thank you once again for attending, and thank you, Martin, for your input at the end. I'm sure this item will probably come back in on the agenda, I'm sure, at some stage in the future. So if we can go on to item number 5 on the agenda, which is prevention and early intervention. So Ian, down to you. We've had the report, as always. It's probably Sean, actually. Sorry, my apologies, Sean. Welcome. We've had the report. So is there anything you would like to add to the report? And
if I could just very quickly, and it will be very quickly, go through some of the points I kind of raised on the presentation. Hopefully members have had sight of the presentation and certainly the report. If I can just give you some headlines, and then that will obviously kind of provide more time as far as questions are concerned.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, brilliant.
Thank you, Councillor Barbara. So just as far as statutory context is concerned, early intervention and prevention has been around probably for the last 20 years in different guises, really, and it's used kind of different language across different organisations. But it's essentially a means by which we can work more smartly, more directly, and in a more person-centred way with the community and with wider numbers, larger numbers of the community. So in terms of the statutory context, that was particularly emphasised in the Care Act in 2014 and kind of re-emphasised in terms of the focus for the health and social care paper in 2020-21. And particularly as far as our arrangements in Calderdale, it looked at making sure that we consolidated strong partnership relationships with statutory organisations, colleagues such as CHFT, the CCG, and the third sector, as well as the wider community itself. Just to give members a kind of sense of the context within which we're working and pressure. People are aware that, you know, since, during and since COVID, there is unprecedented pressure on the system. So the approach to early help and intervention is ever greater, really, in terms of what potentially we can do with that. It's likely that there is going to be some level of levelling out or slowdown, sorry, in terms of NHS funding and certainly within local government. So again, it's how we work more effectively with our communities to support them with the existing resources that we've got. And at the same time, it's almost a perfect storm, but one that isn't insoluble, really, in terms of more people that we're working with within our system that have long-term conditions, complex needs, as well as probably the likelihood of more kind of issues as far as public health is concerned in respect of what may come out of COVID in terms of higher prevalence of people with mental health problems, increased smoking, alcohol consumption, obesity, and so on. So again, that's work and areas that we need to be aware of in terms of the future challenge. What evidence has also shown in terms of local government evaluation and research is that if we work really well with a clear focus at our first contact services, on answering people's queries in a kind of comprehensive, sharp way, it often means, and evidence has really shown this, that people don't have to be sucked into our system to receive support and for us to meet their needs, because there can be lots of answers, lots of solutions across communities if we support them to help people to become more included in their communities, to reduce social isolation and so on. So there are a whole number of mechanisms and ways by which quite a number of local authorities and with their statutory partners have worked really successfully with communities to reduce the demand, but effectively work with more vulnerable members of communities who don't necessarily or won't necessarily have worsened needs as time goes on if we work with them earlier. It is certainly at the centre of all of the work that we're doing within the Directorate and with colleagues across council services and other operational services. In respect of the new structure that has partially already been implemented across the Directorate, where at the heart of it, and particularly with our operational services, it is very much about, you know, how do we work with communities to be healthier, stronger, and more resilient. And one of the initiatives that we've particularly kind of seen quite a lot of benefit from through COVID has been the establishment of our community social work practice team, which has been around probably now for a good 5 years. And more recently, we've seen a number of real benefits through the kind of crisis that we've had really with the pandemic, in terms of how we've identified different ways of working with people and how we can engage with them to help either meet or support their needs. And it's this as a kind of catalyst, really, in terms of how we want to really kind of build that practice as we move forward, not just within our first contact services, but across all of our workforce, particularly in our operational services. So there will be, as we restructure, particularly in my part of the world, a real emphasis on early intervention and prevention, and the use of assistive technology and so on. What you'll find in the appendix of the report are just some examples of where that's happened. What we also want to make sure, and again we found this through the experience of the last year, is the positivity, the real benefit that we've gained from working much more closely with active Calderdale, the Staying Well teams, the alignment with public health colleagues, amongst many others as well, the social prescribing programme with the PCNs. And again, the real benefit, I think we're only really scratching the surface in terms of where we can really go with that and what we've learned from the pandemic. And essentially how we are now kind of making sure that the emphasis is very much on how we can get out there much earlier within the community, so people aren't knocking on our doors anytime sooner than they really need to, and we're understanding the kind of needs of our communities much more quickly and thinking about technological solutions to alleviating isolation and or promoting independence. And there is a lot of kind of collaborative work now, a real sense of can-do-ness with CHFT colleagues, CCG and the third sector in terms of how we can kind of realise this and kind of develop it on a much larger scale than before. And that isn't just about people who are potentially knocking on our door, but the same principles for early intervention and prevention are being used for the people that are already using our services with the most complex needs. So the essence of the paper and what I'm just outlining here is to propose to the Scrutiny Committee that we continue with the development of this and we update you in due course, and or also kind of make sure that we're putting a focus on a hybrid of working with people that have complex needs, but also making sure that we're kind of working with people who have less complex needs, and we bring the two approaches together so that we can get the best of all worlds, really, of how we need to work with our future resources.
Yeah, Sean, thank you so much, and thank you for the case examples. Actually, and the case examples really show the diversity in terms of ages. Where our presumption is that when people need care, it's an older person. Actually, what you've done and highlighted is actually it can be anyone from 18 onwards. Really, I think that's a real key. Some really good points in the report itself, and thank you for this for the brief presentation. So I've got Councillor Lee first, and then Councillor Evans. So Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Again, Sean, thank you for the report. It's a complex subject, we all know that, and it's very much appreciated. Now, at this board, at several meetings ago, we heard about the need for and the great success of 42 Market Street. And as we read in the report, it's now closed, it's no longer used. So in some ways, this was a unique facility because it kind of got to people that we might not ordinarily get to. So the first question is, how can we realistically reproduce or replace that kind of facility? Because everybody was raving about it. We all wanted to find a way to keep it going, but apparently not. And linked with that, we received a very sad report about some extremely vulnerable men that slipped the net. And that, I think, affected all members of this board and everybody that was talking about it when we heard about it. So are we doing anything that is going to not allow these very vulnerable people to slip through the nets? And how on earth will we replace 42 Market Street with something similar? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor Lee. Sean, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Lee. Yeah, I mean, firstly, as far as Market Street is concerned, obviously it was kind of closed through the pandemic. As time went on over the last year, in terms of our thinking, we wanted to make sure that the community social work practice team that were based there were based literally across the borough in terms of the 5 PCNs, and also, as I included in the report, making sure that they were much more available, not just in the town centre, and the potential that we can use, for instance, with the reconfiguration of the borough market, for instance, as a place that they could potentially use on an ongoing basis. But we wanted to make sure that the team itself and all our other practitioners had more visibility, so that they were literally kind of popping up and having regular surgeries in GP surgeries, libraries, and in terms of the reconfiguration of kind of council services and working with the third sector, was a greater presence right across the borough and not just within one site, because there was too much of a focus, as good as it was, within 42 Market Street. What we wanted to do was replicate that, so it was a greater presence, not just with one team, but with all of our teams right across the borough. So as we move forward and go out of COVID, or move out of COVID, I should say, the emphasis is very much, in terms of our restructure, is to make sure that our assessors are much closer to the communities than they've been before, and not as desk-bound in the way that Market Street worked. But that will be a kind of replication of a number of places. And that also we're kind of thinking about the potential of how we could use certain space at the new Northbridge Leisure Centre in terms of, OT services, OT colleagues being there, social care assessor colleagues, profiling different types of equipment and so on, again in the way that happened at 42 Market Street, but can be in that space as well as in other spaces. So it becomes more of a kind of mainstream approach rather than just a one place approach that it was to some extent, as good as it was. As far as the most vulnerable groups are concerned, one of the pieces of work that we're looking at with our restructure is to make sure that we've got a much simpler process in place for people referring the most vulnerable people into our system, particularly Gateway to Care. And that was highlighted, as you cited, Councillor Lee, at the last meeting. But it's something that we're very conscious of in terms of making sure that we've got a single response and referral system, so that when people who are at their most vulnerable with very complex needs, but can still kind of, do their own thing as far as their behaviours are concerned quite often and their lifestyles, that there is a multi-agency kind of meeting as far as those people are concerned as soon as possible. And each of those agencies take accountability for how that person can be supported. In most cases, they are very complex, but it's how we actually kind of ensure that we've got a cohesive wraparound system with those people, and that it's a simple system for professionals to refer into. So that's one of our key areas of focus as we move forward.
Ian, did you want to come back on that? Ian Baines, do you want to come back on that? I know you've put your hand up, so I don't know if this...
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Blackburn. I think Sean's probably responded really well in terms of how we're trying to spread the philosophy of the community social work practice that was based at 42 Market Street across the whole borough. And one of the criticisms that we originally received, that it was quite Halifax centric. And pre-pandemic, one of the things that the team were doing that operated out of 42 Market Street, they were doing pop-ups in other areas. So they were using, for example, Todd Market as a way of doing that. And I think what we'll see going forward is that we will have a more visible presence of community social work practice, its philosophy and its values being seen in all parts of the council, of the authority, not just operating out of a shop front that happens to be 42 Market Street.
Excellent. Thank you, Ian, for that. Councillor Evans.
Thank you, Chair. I think this sort of follows on a little bit, links in with what Councillor Lee has been talking about. I must say it's another comprehensive report. And one of the strong things which comes through to me is the increased level of partnership working amongst the various stakeholders involved in all of this. And I'm really pleased to see that, because I think that's one of the problems which perhaps was highlighted in the main subject we had at the last meeting, that people were not communicating with each other perhaps as well as they should have been doing, and then people did fall through the net. So I think this move, or this increased level of partnership working, is essential, and it's good to see that. What my question really relates to the area where the report is referring to the work programme will ensure certain things. And one of those, it says, is that communities are encouraged and enabled to support individuals with low levels of need, and that there is an increase of quality community support throughout Calderdale, which is accessible to people and professionals. Again, that sounds absolutely right to me. It's something that I'm very keen on in many sorts of areas. I just wanted to know, in this context, what will that actually mean? Who will that refer to, these communities who are encouraged to enable support, and how will it actually happen? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Evans. Sorry, Councillor Barbara.
No, after you, Sean, please. I'm not going to answer it, so please answer it.
One of the kind of work streams within, if you can call it a work stream as such, but one of the key themes within early intervention and prevention is that need to really work with and sometimes give some resource to local communities. And Calderdale, it literally almost goes without saying, it has a lot of very, very strong social capital. So in terms of how, as we move forward, we will want to continue working, but work at probably greater pace with more intensity with communities, is to make sure that we're supporting some of these small community organisations that can make all the difference as far as alleviating, as I said before, someone's isolation or loneliness. So, for instance, there's a fantastic poetry reading club every Friday lunchtime. I know this because I used to go down to the library and work there in Sowerby Bridge, where you had at least kind of 8 people kind of exchanging kind of ideas on poetry and reciting to each other. You've got the Men in Sheds concept, as far as, you know, kind of supporting men who are either bereaved or in one way or the other have lost their kind of bearings in life since they've retired or whatever. There are so many fantastic community organisations right across the board that I actually don't think we as a council have exploited in a positive way, supported in a really positive way, to make sure that they can support more people in their communities. And that doesn't necessarily mean, you know, it's cash necessarily, but how, you know, our social workers, our assessors, our OTs, whoever it may be within our services, our public health colleagues could work with them so that we can give them more confidence. I think it was mentioned kind of earlier on, really, in terms of free access to rooms, things that are very easy to kind of essentially give to people, but in terms of return, it's significant, and how that gives them the confidence and the capacity really to work with more members of their community, particularly the most vulnerable.
Is that okay, Councillor Evans? Yeah, cool. I have Councillor Hutchinson and then Councillor Swift. So, Councillor Hutchinson.
Thank you, Chair. Over the last 10 years, a phrase has come in that I really have a strong aversion to, and that's signposting. And it touches partly on what Councillor Evans and Councillor Lee have said. To me, it conjures up a view of not accepting ownership of the problem, and having a very informal way that's saying, well, no, this isn't something we deal with. Go and see if they can deal with it down the road. And I'm particularly conscious about it where people have isolation or some problems with relating to other people, that the threshold that they have to climb over to actually make those contacts themselves can be very high. and particularly if they're digital contacts that have to be made and not everyone has access to that. So signposting comes up a couple of times in your report as being this is what we do, and your examples showed good, great examples of where things have worked well. But what kind of safeguards are put in to the signposting procedures that you're following now?
Thank you, Councillor Hutchinson. I mentioned in the report and also just in my outline of the report, the LGA evidence. There is the Institute of Personal Care have done a lot of work over the last kind of 10, 12 years in terms of the value, the validity of people contacting council services and then being, as you said, signposted. What does it mean? You can be well signposted and you can be very poorly signposted. And what they looked at, they had some metrics, but essentially they wanted to know what would happen if someone was contacted the council, signposted, and essentially know whether or not that was a valid referral. They noticed in a number of situations it was a poor referral. It didn't really mean anything, and that within kind of 30 days there was a recontact, and within some authorities that was up to kind of 35–40%. So what we want to do going forward, because it was a piece of work I was involved with in an authority where I worked previously, is to have a dashboard, really, an understanding of what happens as far as those signposting referrals are concerned. Was it a valid referral into the community where it really supported the person, so we'd actually kind of pick up and follow that through? Or was it something that came back? And if it came back, why did it come back? So that's some of the kind of the evaluation that we're going to do as we move forward. It will be a kind of audit, a cross-section of those contacts to make sure that what we're doing is valid. It doesn't just look good as far as a dashboard is concerned. And it's all green and wonderful, but it's not really, because people aren't getting the support that they really need.
It would be really interesting to see the outcome of that that audit or research when it becomes available. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Ian, you either trying to confuse me, or would you like to come back in on this stage, please?
I think Councillor Hutchinson's hit on a really important question, and it's the question of words and what they mean. And I agree with him. I think over time, the concept of signposting has become very overused. And I think there was a point in time when signposting was effective for those people who could direct themselves to find the information. But that's a very discrete cohort of people. And actually what we're really talking about is connecting people and supporting people to be connected within their community. And that might not just be as simple as their geographical community. It might be a community that they have something in common with because of a long-term condition. But it's about how do you connect people to people who've got some commonality, some common interests and some common ground that allows them to live that kind of larger life.
Excellent, thank you. Councillor Megan Swift. Oh, sorry, Ian, I've interrupted you, man. My apologies. You took breath.
Sorry, and it's always bad, isn't it? Because I know that you want us to be brief, but I'm not sure we completely answered the questions that Councillor Lee posed, and I think there was a conversation which is about the piece of work around homelessness and our response to homelessness, and I think probably Sean was being kind of really modest. So Sean's leading a piece of work for the Directorate and working with corporate colleagues, including Neve, who you met last time at Scrutiny, doing a piece of work with a national organisation to become a centre of excellence in our approach to people who have got multiple complex issues who may be leading street-based lives. So we are very much at the forefront of that piece of work, and we are committed to make sure that we can pick up on some of that, some of the issues that come and with multiple complex conditions, of which street homelessness is just one element of the their vulnerability.
Excellent, thank you, Ian. Councillor Megan Swift, yeah.
All right, yeah, I'm not muted. Thank you, Chair. A couple of points. One is 42 Market Street. I must be getting very, very confused, because the last meeting where it came up, which is going back a little time, people came to Scrutiny to say it was closed, and this is long before the pandemic, because they hadn't got the staff to keep it open. And I think it was Councillor Lee himself said, well, why can't you put a couple of admin workers in to support the social workers? But to be honest, I think I like the thought of what Sean's been telling us. It makes people in other parts of Calderdale feel as though they matter rather than one. So yeah, I think the moving forward sounds really good, so long as it can be delivered like that. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan. Yeah, thank you. Sean, yes, please, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to that, thank you, Councillor Swift. It was, we felt that we were missing a trick as well, in that even though we had the shop in the town centre, we had a contact centre that was just around the corner. And the two didn't really kind of speak to each other, particularly around those hard conversations that you need to often have with the community and with the most vulnerable groups that come through the contact centre, as well as they did in 42 Market Street. And we felt that putting the expertise of the social workers with the call advisors, and again, it's still very early days, as well as having that presence from the team in the community, would give us a kind of more powerful offer than we had. And there was a disconnect, and we just felt we could do it more efficiently and kind of more boldly on a larger scale across the borough, rather than just in one place.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sean. I think one of the key elements of that is consulting with wards councillors, because actually I know Debs has been brilliant in relation to when she's thought about putting testing centres or there's issues, and actually is contacting ward members, because actually we have the knowledge as to where these places are best set sometimes. I think that's really useful to actually continue. So I have Councillor Barnes, Councillor Riveron, and then Councillor Evans. So Councillor Barnes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think we're all on board that prevention and early intervention is vital and critical. But I think where you know you're widening the base, so to speak, do we have appropriate management structures, flat management structures, or flat decision-making structures in place to match that? Do we have empowerment as low as we can go? In other words, that people aren't ringing somebody and then 25 people involved in the chain. And also what sort of training is doing, because people, you know, if you're talking to a person in the community, they might need to know 5 things, whereas before they only needed to know 2. So can you just come back to me on those, Sean, please? Yeah,
I mean, certainly what we're very mindful of with the restructure in terms of the kind of flat management structures you were talking about is that in my experience, you can talk a good talk, but when it comes to the front-facing operational worker, they've still got a few bureaucratic hurdles to kind of jump over, and also it's still often difficult. And this is something that we're really focusing on over the next 6 months to a year. It can be difficult for people to navigate or get into our system when they're asking, when they want to ask a question. So there is a real piece of work to be done there. And there's no illusion as far as that's concerned, and we're onto it. We need to do that. We know what we need to do. The key to this as well will be the workforce and development approach, really, the development strategy. So it is about empowering frontline workers to say, you can go out there and do this. You don't need our permission, you know, as long as what you're going to do, and we respect your common sense, we would expect you to do this, as long as it's not illegal, or you're spending £1 million in the process, or you are allowed to and will be able to engage in the community in a safe and certain way that will help you with that. That said, though, they need to be given the tools and skills to do that. So again, there's a lot of really good training out there now, as well as what we need to apply just within our own knowledge sets, that actually gives that person, the operational worker, a full understanding. I mean, for instance, there's someone that you and I mutually know who is very, very difficult to engage with, and it's very complex. And everyone's very kind of, difficult in terms of, or different, not difficult, different in terms of how we engage with them. But the workforce development program will give them a kind of tool set, as well as their own common sense to and permissions to go out and do what they feel they can do with the people that they're working with.
Chair, can I just come back?
Of course you can, yeah.
Thank you for that, Sean. So when you come back in 12 months' time, or even 6 or 9 months, I'm just quoting back at you here, what would success look like to you?
I actually think...
Sorry, I know that's an imposing question, but yeah.
Well, certainly, I think I mentioned it earlier on. I think what we're doing, some of the examples that I included on the paper are only scratching the surface, as I said before, in respect of what we can do for people. Success for me would be to have a system, access to information that wouldn't be problematic for people to get to access. So if it was someone that didn't know anything about social care, but needed to phone up about a relative or a friend, they could get through and get the right answer, more or less. Now, that could be through self-service information that can be given digitally, as well as possibly the need to speak to someone. At the moment, that's a real struggle to navigate easily for some of our public. And for me, it would be able to do that on a larger scale than we're able to at the moment.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean, for that. Councillor Riddron.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of things I'd like to mention. One, I'd like to go back to Councillor Hutchinson's point about signposting. Except this can be done well and it can be done badly, but it can very much feel like you're on your own. And when people are seeking support, they may be probably going through a crisis, a difficulty in feeling that they either can't support with caring or, struggling to cope on their own. And basically to just be sort of said, you can try this, this and this, can just feel like basically you're left in your own devices. And I wonder how many people are signposted, just don't go any further until the next crisis. And when we're auditing it, I think need to know for people who just took that as a rejection and didn't actually follow it up. I think the second thing I've made, and there's some good examples in the case studies you mentioned of how services seem to be built around individuals. But the opposite of that can be people delivering the services that they deliver in the way they deliver it. And it doesn't always actually build a service around the individual, and there can be cracks and gaps that can't be overcome. So I think that is the second point in terms of how can services actually, how can we make the service we offer and partner organisations offer meet the needs of the individual rather than expecting the individual to fit the services.
Some really good points, Councillor Riddron there, especially with the signposting, and can we put a system in place to manage when somebody does walk through the front door that actually they get back in contact? Did you manage to get in contact with somebody in an organisation? So it's real key. Sean, do you want to come back on the points that Councillor Riddron has nicely made?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Babber. Thank you, Councillor Riddron. For me, and this, I'm coming at it purely from a social worker's perspective, and rightly or wrongly, as an AD, I still work with quite a few members of the public, and I like that about my role in Calderdale, because you actually, you're not distanced from the people that you're serving, really. And that's not just me saying that tritely for the benefit of this committee. It's genuinely the case, and it's the style of the council which is really good. For me, in terms of your first point, it's the ability to kind of listen, and the skill comes in where you've got the community social work practitioner, the qualified social worker. They don't have to be qualified necessarily, but someone with that experience of understanding when they receive a message or they listen to a call, that there is more to it. If you kind of ask the right questions, you'll find out more about the person's circumstances. And it's that key bit that we really have to get right between the call advisor, who will be taking the call and not recognizing that necessarily, or there are some fantastic call advisors that do straight away. And that interchange, that interaction between the social care assessor, the social worker, and the call advisor. So when the call comes through, and often it's under quite a lot of pressure and demand, you can, because there is a skill to it, but lots of people can have the skills as well. You can pick up on the nuances of the conversation to know that that person needs more than just advice and information. You know, some of it is just kind of fairly straightforward or obvious in terms of the fact that they've been recently bereaved, they're in their early 80s, they've had a life partner for 50 years, they haven't got them anymore, they don't have family nearby, and they're struggling to cope with the basics apart from the emotional fallout of the bereavement. It's the practical stuff, and it's that kind of presentation that we should be able to pick up on a call fairly quickly and know what to do with it. That should be the skill of the first contact centre. But your second point as well is about, and not that that would be done well in 100% of cases, but that's what we should aim towards. And your second point about the wraparound or the personalised approach, I think that's very symptomatic of a new area that we're involved with, which is the street homeless group. More of them now are starting to present to agencies, and we're starting to, with the work that Ian cited, and with the Making Every Adult Matter programme, we're starting to kind of understand how we need to engage with this group, and how, in fact, this group can help us kind of co-produce what we need to do, instead of us saying, this is what you need as a person, as an individual, which quite often we get wrong. So the key aspect of that programme is listening to them and then bringing them into the discussion to know how they can actually kind of come up with what they think are the solutions for their lives, as well as enabling them to do it. Now, again, that's easier said than done. It's a hard piece of work, but it's not just us doing to them, as has been the case before, and can actually take a good number of years before you turn a person's life around.
Okay.
Ian, do you want to come back as well on that? You put your hand up, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Blackburn. I think Councillor Riveron's question really gets to the heart of what we need to do, which is, I think, for quite a long time in my career in adult social care, which has been very long, I think at times we have done things to people, and I've heard conversations where people will talk about people not being compliant with the system. And in fact, it's a system that needs to adapt and change. And I think one of the things that we need to really push forward on, and it comes back to the early conversation we had around our approach to commissioning, is ensure that if we're commissioning particular types of support, that they aren't focused purely on task, that they are really responsive and agile. And I'm not saying we get it right 100% of the time, but if I pick up a challenge of Councillor Barnes, which is in 9 months' time, I'd like us to be able to see that we've got more responsive services that aren't saying these people won't work with us because they can't fit. Actually, it's the service that needs to adapt and change, not the person.
Thanks, Ian, for that. Councillor Evans, you've been very patient, so I'm going to bring you in at this stage.
Thank you. It's a quick one, Chair. Thank you. Item 4 in the report is the options appraisal. and it says it looked at a number of options. I don't see a decision on those options. The options were investment into early intervention and prevention, or only focus on adult social care and wellbeing services. And the third one was develop a hybrid model incorporating both of these. I don't know whether I've missed it, but there doesn't seem to be a sort of answer to that option, those three options. Certainly, I would state my preference and say that the hybrid model of the two versions would be far preferable to me. But I would like to see what the officers' views are on that. Thank you.
Sean, do you want to come back on that? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I didn't actually explain the options particularly well when I was outlining it. So thank you, Councillor Evans, for actually kind of stating them in terms of the three options that were that are highlighted in the paper. The reason why we included them was to kind of highlight to members that some councils are kind of investing more of their money in just working with those people that are eligible for services, and not necessarily thinking about the longer term, further down the stream work that we're talking about here, in respect of avoiding coming into the system, and or having a combination of both, which is what most councils do in respect of a key focus, a key eye on early intervention and prevention. And again, as I touched on before, not just stopping at that as far as first contact services are concerned and the wider population, but making sure that we're also doing that and spending the money that we need to as well on those people with the most complex needs that need our kind of resources and support to make sure that they're well and healthy, but also as independent as possible. One of the points that I raised in the report was, when we think about early intervention and prevention, it's not just about everything that we've talked about this evening, but also people with learning disabilities and mental health problems accessing employment, and that our performance locally is really good. But to continue with that and improve that performance even further, so that more people with learning disabilities are getting into employment and not needing to become reliant on our services.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sean, and thank you, Councillor Evans, for raising that. And I think it's all about the care closer to home almost model. And I'm welcoming the fact that actually he's stretching out just from being Halifax centric to wider communities. I think that's absolutely fabulous in relation to that. I'm sure we'll see more on the scrutiny in relation to progress on this. I'm sure members would welcome the opportunity at some future stage. But Sean, thank you for the comprehensive report, and thank you members for asking some really great questions on that. So actually, it's really key. So thanks for that. So item number 6 is the COVID-19 briefing. Debs, you've been an absolute superstar this year. You provided us with absolute key information. You joined the authority in the middle of all the pandemic, and actually, I know Ian's always good, but in the offices. But actually, I just want to say a special thanks to Debs for all the information and hard work. And it's not easy when you join a new authority in these times. So thanks, Debs, and over to you. I know the report probably gets shorter and shorter each time, and so over to you with the information.
Oh, thank you very much. I wasn't expecting that, Councillor Blackburn. That's really kind. Yes, it was my year anniversary last week. So yes, it's been a really strange year. So I've got a little bit of a verbal update. Apologies, you've not got a written report, but just to give you the most up-to-date sort of situation. So just a few highlights really. So just for those of you like the figures, there were 106 positive COVID PCR tests in the period the 27th of March to the 2nd of April. And that gives us a rate of 50 per 100,000, and that's a fall of 56% compared to the same day the previous week. That's lower than the regional average, so better than the regional average, which is 78, and higher than the national average, which is worse than the national average, which is 39. And Calderdale is currently ranked 69th highest in its case rate out of the 314 councils. Just a little bit about where we're seeing cases at the moment, and then I'll say a little bit about why we think we're seeing such a reduction at the moment. So the rates are falling actually in all age groups in the most recent week. They're still highest in children and young people aged between 5 and 10 and 11 and 16. The really good news is the big significant reduction that we've seen in cases in people aged 60 and over. So in that same time period, the rate was actually 17 per 17 per 100,000, and that's reduced by 57% compared to the same day the previous week. So you know, we are seeing the lowest rates at the moment in Calderdale that we have seen since September of last year. I think just a little bit about why we are perhaps where we are, and I'm afraid it might not last quite as long as well, you know, I hope it does, but it may not. So we need to shape our expectations, I think. So in Calderdale and in our neighbouring areas, we know that the latest national lockdown didn't have the same impact as in many other parts of the country, and that's very much, we're pretty clear now, that's a combination of living and working conditions. So we left the lockdown and entered restrictions with higher rates on average than other parts of the country. We've also what we've seen is following the we had an increase in case rates linked to increased testing and the reopening of school during March. So we tested more people, massive increase in testing, and we found more cases. So we had an increase. What's happened since then, since Easter, the Easter break, we've halved actually the amount of testing that children and young people that are doing at secondary school age. So that is influencing and one of the reasons that we're seeing a reduction in the number of cases. If we test lots of thousands and thousands of young people, we will find people that have got COVID. If we test a lot fewer, half of them, we'll find fewer people with COVID. I think the other thing it's important that the Scrutiny Board is aware of is that we've been under very strict restrictions in Calderdale since the Kent variant became dominant. And you'll know, we've shared before, that Kent variant just spreads so much more easily. So the recent relaxation of restrictions are the first opening of restrictions since that variant made up all of our cases. So what I think it's important that the board is aware of is that we probably haven't seen the full impact of that Kent variant on the number of our cases. So as you know, the restrictions ease with a variant that spreads much more easily, we may again see an uptick in cases. So that's sort of the picture in relation to where we are. Great news that we're seeing the rates come down. Really good that the rates are coming down as we're moving into the opening of restrictions, because that means that there's less underlying COVID potentially. I just wanted to say a little bit, if it's okay, Chair, about the vaccine, just really briefly.
Yeah, perfect, yeah.
So the vaccine, you know, the rate I just quoted in terms of the case rate in over 60s is probably because of the benefit of the vaccine and impact that we're seeing of the vaccine. But the big impact, the big positive impacts that we're seeing is the reduction in hospitalisation and death rates. They continue to fall in Calderdale really steadily. The up and down that we're seeing in the case rates is not reflected at all in hospitalisation and death rates. So I think that's really because of the success of the vaccine programme. And just to give you a few numbers again for members that like numbers, we've now vaccinated 104,461 people in Calderdale, administered 121,836 vaccines, and we've now 94% of people over 50 have had the vaccine now, which is fantastic news. And then just really briefly, a couple more points, just to say that Ramadan starts next week, and we've met with imams and mosque trustees, and we're working with them and supporting them to review the risk assessments so that they can manage daily prayers, and also they're helping us get the message out about the vaccine, and also the importance of praying at home for those that are self-isolating because they've tested positive or a case. And some good news, finally, Chair, just about contact tracing. We continue to take on more responsibility from the National Test and Trace to our local contact tracing service. So now we speak to contacts as well as cases. I think board committee members will know that we've been asking to do that for a long time. We're now doing that as part of a pilot, and that's gone really, really well. And we've now formally requested to NHS Test and Trace that we take on all contact tracing from day one. That will allow us to integrate contact tracing with support for people to isolate right from the day that people get their positive test results. So that's the update from me, Councillor Blackburn. I'm very happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, absolutely wonderful. Thank you for that report. It was yeah, very positive. So I've got Councillor Lee, then Councillor Bain. So Councillor Lee, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Debs, and may I echo the Chairman's congratulations on your 1 year anniversary, and what a year it's been for you. Very well done. It is great. These are great statistics, but they mirror statistics elsewhere, and we're not the lowest place on the list. You know, we're still affected more than many local authority areas. Earlier on, we mentioned that a great success has been the ability of our staff and the NHS staff to adapt to what has been a rapidly changing situation. You know, there's no denying that. And there was no correct or incorrect answers at the start of this. And they have. But, you know, some national commentators, not political, just commentators, in retrospect, are quite critical of a number of the things that the national government has done and the sequence in which they've done them. So I just want to ask you this question about our own performance, of which I know we're very proud. And every Monday, Deb, you give me and the other leaders and the MPs an update of all the facts and figures. We monitored it very closely. And it's remarkable, I'm sure you'd agree, how quickly things just change, and it's difficult to understand why. So just to get a fair assessment of our performance, and given that some people are very wise after the event, do you think in all the circumstances, would we, or should we, or could we have done anything differently to what we've done? Thank you.
That's such a good question, Councillor Lee. And we actually have recently updated our local outbreak plan. And as part of that, we have done a process with lessons learned. You know, sort of what's gone well, what have we learned, what will we do differently? And I haven't got it in front of me. I wish I had now, Councillor Lee. Now you've asked that really great question. I think you're absolutely right. I think that things change, and I can remember days, literally days, when within the day the situation has deteriorated massively. You know, because of the way the data comes out. And I think, you know, this is a new virus, and we've learned about the virus all the time, and again that learning and you know, and reflecting on what's been and how it's changing, what we learn about it, what we know, what the evidence says, is really, really important. And so I think it's really difficult because, as I say, things can change literally within hours. We can have a fantastic, research analysis be published that tells us, for example, we've now got a new Kent variant, and that's explaining why some of the things are happening, and the profiling of the different variants that we're seeing, that's done. I think, for me, I think being able to react as quickly as we possibly could. I think we've learned a lot about how to do that, reacting much more quickly. We're probably slower to react earlier, while we saw a positive trend or a negative trend and we thought that would continue. I think we've learned very much to adapt much more quickly later in the pandemic. I think the other things, I think for me, that it has been really important is for us to think about what Calderdale needs, and what the people of Calderdale need. And there have been times, I think, in the pandemic where it's been so fast moving and so complicated. We've lost sight, it's easy to lose sight of what do the people of Calderdale need us to do. There's all this new testing available, all these new things available. What should we do? So my reflections are, it is about adapting. I think the other thing I wish we'd done sooner, we've developed a really successful community COVID champions program. It's really made a difference in our communities. I wish we'd done that sooner. It's to be honest, it's the stuff that Sean has been talking about in the prevention. It's those principles. To be honest, it's the stuff that gets me out of bed every day, that sort of work, and I'm passionate about. And actually, again, I personally think, well, we lost sight a bit of that, and actually that is the stuff that we know works. I wish we'd done that sooner. And I wish we'd rolled it out across the borough sooner. So we did it probably a month later than I would have liked, and then rolled it out probably a month later than I would have liked to. But you're quite right, Councillor Lee. It's easy to look back, isn't it, with wisdom in retrospect, but it's really hard when you're actually dealing with it every day. So yeah, great question, and I will be happy actually to share that lessons learned template with you as a scrutiny board, just for your own information, to help scrutiny moving forward as well, because I think there was some helpful stuff in there, but it's not all in my head at the moment.
You've got an awful lot going around in your head, so thank you, Des, for that. Councillor Baines.
Thank you, Chairman. Sorry, difficult to get in this mic off then. I echo the comments both you and Stephen have made regarding Deborah's first year, which has got to be the most difficult year since we've, the Director of Public Health, felt into the Council's responsibilities. So my personal thanks for what you've done as well, Deborah. But my question is basically, I just wanted to know what has been the numbers, if you've got this information to hand, about the people who are refusing the vaccination for not, there's some people who naturally it would be unsafe for them to take it. But so excluding those who are doing it because of they're believing the propaganda, for a better term, about the vaccination, and looking at the dark side instead of the positive side of the vaccination process, which is, I think, as you pointed out, is been more beneficial in bringing down the number of serious cases than anything. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is that the vast majority of people so far that have been offered the vaccine have taken up the offer. So we're going down, as you know, Councillor Baines, going down the cohorts, and I've actually got a document open because I thought you might ask me this question. So when and you'll have to excuse me taking my glasses off because it's really small. But when we look at the vaccine uptake, 95% of residents of care homes, older people's care homes, have taken up the vaccine, so only 5% haven't had it. Often that's not because they've refused it, it's because either they can't have it or it's movement people perhaps have just entered a care home or have moved on to a different home. 57% of them have had the second vaccine now as well, which is fantastic. In terms of staff in older people's care homes, 73% have had the first dose. And we don't actually have any data at the moment on the second dose. So that would be what's that? 27% of people, of staff in care homes for older people haven't taken up the offer so far. Although, as Ian will remind us, that is edging up as all the time. In terms of the people that are over 80, 95% of people have had that dose. In terms of people that are 70 and over and clinically extremely vulnerable, 89% have taken up the offer. And in terms of people aged 55 to 59, 85% have taken up the offer. And then finally, the 50 to 54 age group, 81% have taken up the offer. And so what you can see from that is that the vast majority of people in all of those priority cohorts have taken up the offer of the vaccine. We have seen some, when we look at uptake in some of those age groups by areas, there are some areas of the borough where we've got slightly lower uptake, but even in those areas, the vast majority, high 70s to 80% of people have taken up the offer, even in the areas with the lowest uptake. And what we found has worked, particularly in some of the areas where we identify there's lower uptake, is the pop-up clinics that we've been doing in community settings, in trusted community venues. What we see there is people coming along and actually taking the opportunity to speak to a trusted GP or a trusted community member and just ask them questions that they've got about the vaccine, and then ultimately often will take up the offer. So we're doing work all the time to understand who are the people that aren't taking up the offer of the vaccine. Sometimes it's because they don't want to. Sometimes it's because it's not convenient, or there's a data issue. We've got the wrong address or the wrong phone number. So we're working on that. And obviously, the fewer numbers, the fewer people that haven't had the vaccine, the more able we are to ring them up and have a chat with them and try and understand why they've chosen not to take the vaccine, and understand what the concerns are.
And thanks, Deb. Councillor Hutchinson.
Thanks, Chair. I'm delighted to hear that we're looking to do contact tracing from the start, so it cuts down the delays that might be into either making contact or offering support, and some of the confusion that can occur from people being approached from multiple different directions. The advantage of, we've got an opportunity from the impact of the lockdown and the vaccination programme, and numbers of cases coming down so much in Calderdale. We've got an opportunity to focus on those people who do actually have the disease or are most at risk. We've seen to our cost what happens when the eye gets taken off the ball. This disease can recur very, very quickly. What are we going to do differently to try and make sure that doesn't happen in Calderdale, albeit that Calderdale isn't an island unto itself?
Thank you, Councillor Hutchinson. Another fantastic question. So we've recently reviewed our local outbreak plan, which really starts to focus now on living with COVID. So it's how we prevent and manage outbreaks as restrictions are relaxed and we learn to live with COVID. And you're absolutely right. What that means we need is a different approach to the approach that we've had previously. That will be published next week, the outbreak plan, the updated outbreak plan. So just a couple of examples. We've seen very clearly that at the moment, the real risk areas, particularly now we've got so many people in care homes and the NHS vaccinated, the risk settings now are workplaces and education settings, schools and education settings. It's really clear from looking at our data that that's the case. So in terms of we do an incredible amount of work with schools to support them put into place measures to reduce the risk of the virus spreading. We've got really fantastic uptake actually in Calderdale of the secondary school testing, lateral rapid flow tests, for example, and we're working really closely and engaged very much with schools and work with them, listening to them and supporting them to put measures in place. I have to say, if we're paying tribute to people, I would pay tribute to head teachers and staff in schools who've learned how to be public health officers and contact tracers, as well as teaching and delivering different teaching methods. Have been amazing, so I think we've got a really good basis to work on, to build from. In terms of workplaces, we are in the process of developing a risk-based approach to engaging with and supporting workplaces. So what we're doing is we're working with workplaces and working through our regeneration economic development team that engage with businesses, and also our environmental health team, to identify the businesses in Calderdale that are high risk of COVID spreading, medium risk and low risk, and then what we're doing is developing interventions, the intensity of which meet the level of risk. So the low risk will be webinars, messages through a web portal. You know, the high risk will be visits and regular contact. And the medium risk will be something in between the two, and we really hope that that'll allow us to be proactive and support businesses, offering things like rapid testing, offering support with adaptations, and also offering support, because we know that we've got more smaller businesses than most places, and it's harder for those businesses to make the adjustments and adaptation, invest resources in the changes that need to be made to reduce the risk of COVID spreading. So again, it's about making sure that we join up all the support that we can give to businesses. And then finally, we're in the process of developing a scenario-based plan for outbreak prevention and management and living with COVID. So that what we've done is we've identified 6 scenarios where we could be at each different stage of the government's roadmap. And then what we'll do is we'll think about, well, what will we do? What will that mean? How will we communicate with the public? What will we do with workplaces? What will we do with outbreak prevention in those different scenarios? And we hope that'll allow us to be on the front foot so that we can anticipate the different scenarios that will be in place. We're developing that plan in a couple of weeks' time.
Excellent. Thank you, Debs, for that one. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Debs, thank you. And I'm really pleased to hear that we've got contact tracing from scratch. But I do have 1 or 2 questions about it. I understand that it's handled, I might be wrong, by volunteers mostly. Is that correct?
Councillor Clark, it's a combination of volunteers and staff, and redeployed staff as well. So it's a mix of people.
Yeah. So if we had a third outbreak, a third upsurge, would we have the capacity to handle that? And presumably you've convinced the national contact trace, or whoever has given you permission to do this, you've managed to convince them that you can. I'm just wondering how we understand it.
Yeah, I think we haven't actually. So we've asked. So we've been agreed, and we have taken on contacting contacts of cases. So not just the people that test positive, but the contacts. And we formally requested to take on all of it from day 0. We haven't yet heard back whether that's something that we'll be able to do. But we are quite confident that we will be able to do that. At the moment, we're getting relatively small numbers through. We've definitely got the capacity to do that. But what we've also got is a plan, a sort of a contingency plan that sets out how we'll get additional capacity if we need it. So where we'll draw that from, and how we'll do that. So at the moment, we've got people that are redeployed from other council services that will go back as services reopen. We've got some staff that we've taken on. And we've got some staff that are part-time and work extra hours that we pay to do this. But the manager of the services has convinced me and hopefully has convinced NHS Test and Trace that we've got the capacity now that we need, and we've got the ability to sort of surge and get additional resources as and when we need to. We've got a real army of people now in Calderdale that are trained up to do this, whether they be volunteers or staff, so that we could ask them to step up and step in if we needed to.
I didn't doubt it for one moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Debs, and thanks once again for a very comprehensive response to some they get more challenging questions as we get further along. so thank you for coming for this agenda item, most useful. So members, let's go to item number 7, which is the joint health scrutiny meetings. I'm hoping Mike is going to join us on camera and give us a very brief overview, a very whirlwind overview, hopefully.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As members may remember, we participate in 2 joint health scrutiny committees. One is the Calderdale and Kirklees Joint Health Scrutiny Committee. The other one's the West Yorkshire Joint Health Scrutiny Committee. The Calderdale and Kirklees one that has 4 members from Calderdale: Councillor Hutchinson, Councillor Collins, Councillor Blagborough, and another councillor whose names I'm trying to remember. It will come back to me. That's primarily is only concerned with the hospital reconfiguration, the changes to Calderdale Royal Hospital and Huddersfield Royal Infirmary. Councillor Hutchinson is the lead councillor from Calderdale on that. That met recently and will meet again in June or July, particularly to pick up on some of the aspects of the community services that need to be in place to support the hospital reconfiguration. The West Yorkshire Joint Health Scrutiny Committee again met recently, both mainly as an informal seminar to look at the white paper on integration that's been referred to previously, and also to have a bit of a discussion about the Nightingale Hospital at Harrogate. And that will meet again on June the 22nd, which will be the first meeting of the new year for that committee. We'll come on to the work plan in a minute. I'm sure that sometime soon in the new municipal year, you'll have a discussion on the white paper again, and the West Yorkshire committee becomes more significant as the West Yorkshire and Harrogate Health and Care Partnership takes on a bigger role. So that will be quite a big change for your relationship with the NHS and the CCG in particular. The membership from Calderdale of those 2 joint health scrutiny committees is normally decided at the first meeting in the municipal year. So I imagine in June we'll have the re-election or the reappointment by this board of members to both those committees. But I know Councillor Hutchinson and Councillor Blagborough herself were at both the recent meetings, so I don't know if you have anything to add on that, councillors.
Councillor Hutchinson, after you. I'll let you go first.
Yes, I mean, thanks. In the Calderdale and Kirklees one, it was certainly whether the community services will allow the trajectory match up with the trajectory that's been planned for allowing the reconfigured hospital to manage with the number of beds that it has, rather than a need to expand them as the proportion of elderly people and the overall population increases by 15%. Is one of the questions that we're seeking assurance on, and the other is an update on the financial case for the reconfiguration, given that there've been quite a number of changes in the financial structure of the health service. Regarding the West Yorkshire discussion of the integrated white paper, one of the concerns is that there is no mention anywhere within that white paper of any role for scrutiny whatsoever, which kind of alarmed the scrutiny board. And it was agreed that we would we would bring our concerns to the attention of the Secretary of State, and we're waiting for a draft letter to be produced to raise some of the concerns that were often about the omissions that seem to be absent from the white paper.
Thank you, Councillor Hutchinson. I've got nothing really to add to that. I think it was very well done on that. I'm just going to bring Councillor Lee, Mike, is indicated he wants to speak, I think, hopefully. Yes, good.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know, this might be a convenient time to raise this. I sent you an email yesterday about the dentistry subcommittee.
Yes, indeed. We're probably just going to go on to the work programme, but we can. If everyone's in agreement, can I just bring Mike back in now? I'll bring you back in, Stephen Lee, on the work programme parts. Yeah, so Mike, please. Yeah.
I just wanted to say, Chair, with some trepidation, the fourth member that I forgot of the Calderdale and Kirklees board is Councillor Swift. So she is the fourth member of that board.
Yeah, no, super. Okay, well, let's move on to item number 8, and rightly so. Councillor Lee has sent an email in relation to picking up the dentistry work following the sad loss of Councillor Greenwood. I do understand Councillor Evans has stepped into the thing, and I think we had a discussion earlier with Mike that actually he was going to gather up a further meeting prior to the end of this municipal year. So hopefully you can get back together and get working on what's really important for dentistry, really. So if you have anything else to add, Councillor Lee, please by all means step in.
Well, thanks for fixing that, Chair. It's important that we continue with this. I'm delighted that Ashley's agreed to join Mike and I on this subcommittee, and we had a good start. And it's essential that we keep the kettle boiling, as it were. So thanks for your work on that. And if Mike's already got some ideas about fixing up a meeting at an earlier opportunity, I welcome that. And yeah, job done. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, Councillor Lee. And so the rest of the programme has been circulated, but equally the new municipal year will potentially see additions. There'll be this opportunity for discussions, whoever the chair is at that particular time, to work through the work programme. Just to let you know, we have provisionally set up further meetings with the Adult Safeguarding Board, so that actually we are in regular communications with them, and we can work together rather than be told things that we're not fully aware of. Mike, do you want to come in at this stage?
I think the only other thing to say, Chair, is that we've also agreed with the CCG that the chair of the Scrutiny Board and myself will have regular meetings to discuss their inputs and agenda items come up in the future. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to arrange a meeting for the latter half of May after the annual meeting of council, so that we make sure that we're engaged with the CCG on their input as well.
Thank you, Mike. And I think that's probably for the work programme. So it comes to me to say a big, massive thank you to all members for their input as I've been the chair for this municipal year. It's been a real pleasure to work with you. It's been some extremely wonderful meetings. We've carried out a COVID review. We've done an awful lot of work with the help of officers. So I think it's a big thanks to the members for their inputs, and more importantly for officers for their time, attendance, and putting up with some very awkward questions from ourselves at times. And nobody's gone away upset. So I think we've done all right. We've done okay. So I'm going to close the meeting, and I'd like to thank you all for attendance this evening. So thank you so much indeed, and